Hello everyone and welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. Today I'm going to be kicking off a little part of a new series, and it's going to be me just going through every single team in the NFL, going through, kind of their roster, their depth charts, talking about the fantasy impacts for the 2021 season, and then if there's some guys a little bit lower on the depth chart that could be potential values in Dynasty later on, I'll mention them for Dynasty impact as well. But just a quick little overview on each team, kind of some of the moving pieces that came in and out, and just overall values for the 2021 season from a redraft perspective. So we're going to start off with the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, you had a couple little changes with the Arizona Cardinals. Kenyon Drake's out, James Conner's in. Could fill that same type of role. Obviously, Larry Fitzgerald, Cardinals legend, is now no longer with the Cardinals. They brought in A.J. Green, and they drafted Rondale Moore as well. So a couple of changes there. And we're going to start off with the quarterback, Kyler Murray. He is the number 3 quarterback in ECR, and he's the number 3 quarterback in ADP right now. At the beginning of last year, he was looking like he could be the number 1 quarterback overall in fantasy, honestly. And, he was on pace for 4,000 yards, 1,000 rushing yards. Then he got that shoulder injury, wasn't quite the same after that. So we're going to see what he looks like this year. I think he's definitely, a top 3 or 5 quarterback once again, unless something majorly changes in this offense. The passing volume definitely benefits him. Not quite sure if he's going to have as many rushing touchdowns as he did the last couple of years, but maybe that rushing comes down. Maybe he throws the ball a little bit more to compensate for it as well. Maybe he has a couple extra passing touchdowns in the red zone. I know the Cardinals have mentioned that they do not want him running quite as much this year. Obviously, they wanted to keep their franchise quarterback, in good health. Then we move over to the running back position. We got Chase Edmonds and James Conner. So this is probably going to end up being a split backfield. James Conner could work his way into that Kenyon Drake role. We could see an uptick in snaps and touches for Chase Edmonds overall. He could get a little bit of uptick in the passing game too without Larry Fitzgerald, with no real tight ends on this roster. Definitely guys that you want to watch out for. In your draft, if you're playing in a PPR league, half-point PPR league, it probably favors Chase Edmonds a little bit more. If you're playing in more of a standard league, probably favors James Conner a little bit more, since James Conner is really good around the goal line throughout his career. Chase Edmonds only has 1 carry around the goal line. But it's very important to keep in mind that both these guys have had some injuries in the past. They're a little bit injury prone, as the people would like to call it. James Conner has a long laundry list of injuries. And Chase Edmonds, while he's only missed 3 games, he's been banged up a ton throughout his NFL career. He's not the biggest running back by any means. So if you're looking at a dynasty perspective, you see all these guys here at the end of the depth chart. You got your Jonathan Wards, your Eno Benjamins, Tavion Feaster, and Mohammed, who we're not even going to really mention him, but Benjamin's a guy that if you have that extra taxi squad spot, you could put him on the end of your bench because, hey, something happens to Chase Edmonds. He goes down. Maybe he comes in and works his way into the backfield a little bit. Or James Conner goes down, maybe works the way in the backfield. Or maybe these two guys are both banged up at the same point in time, and Benjamin kind of gets a little bit of a feature role, because I think he's the most talented of the rest of the guys on the roster. He's the one that has the draft capital, even if it's only 7th round. He was a guy coming out of Arizona State that, a few people were pretty fond of as well. So if you have that extra spot on your dynasty team, you're looking for a running back flyer, Benjamin is definitely somebody you can target. If we're talking about half-point PPR, ECR, and ADP, Chase Edmonds comes in as running back 26 in ECR and running back 24 in ADP. I think this is kind of about right. I think for myself right now, I have him at about running back 28, so it's not too far off. Definitely some upside there. If he does hit that upside, if he gets more touches, if he stays healthy, he could definitely outperform his draft position at this point in time. But then we're also talking about a guy, if he doesn't get the touchdowns, if the receiving work is not quite as good as it was last year, he could definitely underperform too. Have a couple guys behind him leapfrog him is definitely a possibility. Then James Conner, typically going a little bit after him, running back 35 in ECR, running back 34 in ADP. This is a guy, if he gets that Kenyon Drake role, people were really clamoring to Kenyon Drake last year. He was a top 12 running back going into the draft season, and as far as his ADP went. So if you can get that production, obviously he didn't quite perform on that production, so people were disappointed. But if you're drafting James Conner as a running back 3 in your fantasy drafts for redraft for this season, if he can duplicate, we'll say 80%, 90% of what Kenyon Drake did last year, you're going to be very happy where you're getting him at in drafts. But once again, you always have that injury concern with James Conner. But most of the time when he's out, we already know he's out with an injury. So you're not playing the guessing game. Oh, is he kind of banged up? Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? It's just the games where he gets knocked out early. Those are the ones that are going to hurt you. Then we move over to the wide receiver position. And obviously the big one we have to talk about is DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And he comes in at wide receiver 5 in ECR and wide receiver 6 in ADP. This is probably about right. For myself, I have him at wide receiver 4. You're looking at guys like Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and Devontae Adams ahead of him. Those are probably the only 3 guys that I would take ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. He is the main focus on this offense. He's going to get his targets. He's going to average about 10 a game. He's about as safe as it comes from the wide receiver position, and he rarely is injured. So that's one of the safest wide receivers you can get when you're starting your team. Then behind him is kind of, a cluster, because we don't really know who the wide receiver 2 is going to be at this point in time. In the past, it's kind of been Larry Fitzgerald, but he's no longer with the team. We got the ghost of AJ Green coming over. Did not look very good last year for the Cincinnati Bengals. So his ECR comes in at wide receiver 76, and his ADP actually comes in at wide receiver 89. So the public's a lot lower than him than the experts. But I just don't see it there. He's a guy, if you're out there in drafts, you can let him go undrafted. If something changes with this situation, if he looks more like the AJ Green of old, you can always pick him up on waivers. If you're on like a Dynasty league, you're in a Dynasty startup, and you really want to take a flyer on a guy late, I don't mind doing that, because if he does anything at all, there's probably someone in your league that will trade for him and give you like a 3rd round pick for him. Definitely not out of the question. Then we'll go to Christian Kirk, since he's kind of the mainstay. So he comes in at wide receiver 66 in ECR, wide receiver 64 in ADP. He could definitely outperform that. Obviously, we saw some pretty good flash games from him last year. Then Kyler Murray got hurt with the shoulder injury. Christian Kirk was more their deep threat last year. And as soon as Kyler Murray's shoulder injury came into play, Christian Kirk just kind of died off. Maybe he's a guy that's a little bit better for DFS. We'll see if he moves more to a traditional slot role, or if they still use him in that deep passing game. So wide receiver 66, wide receiver 64, he could definitely outperform that, like I already said. But there's also some downside. If this young cat that we're going to be talking about here, Rondale Moore, comes in and really takes over that wide receiver 2 role, it could definitely knock down Christian Kirk. And Rondale Moore, this is a guy that I love coming out of Purdue. 2nd round pick. They invested pretty good draft capital in him. Super freak of an athlete. The only big thing people have knocks on him is he's 5'7". Had a little bit of injury history at Purdue. He honestly should have tore his ACL his sophomore year. A little bit banged up, the junior year, opt in, opt out, between all the COVID stuff, the Big Ten. I'm not really worried about any of that. One of the greatest freshman years ever from a Big Ten wide receiver. We saw him destroy Ohio State. I think this is a perfect fit for him. You got that underneath, air raid, quick, short offense, getting him the ball in space, let him do what he does. If he's a guy that's one of these slot wide receivers, that's getting 8 to 9 targets a game, if he somehow gets in that range, this is going to be a very valuable wide receiver 3 on your team, and you're getting him dirt cheap, because he is going wide receiver 73 in ECR and wide receiver 73 in ADP. You're drafting him essentially as a wide receiver 6 on your team, who could potentially be a wide receiver 3 in the spot, wide receiver 4. I think there's definitely a big return on value there. And then if you're going in Dynasty, he was going a lot of times in rookie drafts in the 2nd round. There's a lot of upside there for him. He's probably never going to be that wide receiver 1 on your team when you're talking from a Dynasty perspective, but he could still be a very valuable contributor, especially with the way we're seeing the NFL trend, where these slot wide receivers are getting more and more valuable. They're on the field more often. You look at the Cardinals offense, 67% of the plays they ran last year had 3 wide receivers or more on the formation. So you have to think that Rondale Moore is going to be on the field more times than not. And then you go back 2 years ago, 71% of the time they had 3 wide receivers on the field or more. And when you look at their tight ends that we are going to talk about here in a minute, these tight ends are not going to do anything for anyone, whether it's real life football or fantasy football. So moving down to tight ends, we got Max Williams. Once upon a time was a pretty good draft pick, 2nd round, coming out of the University of Minnesota. Never panned out in his career. In ECR, he's tight end 53, which is nobody you want to touch. He's going undrafted in regular ADP. Behind him, we got Darrell Daniels, who was undrafted in real life originally. He's the tight end 79 in ECR and undrafted in ADP. Last year, we saw Dan Arnold kind of have an impact, but he's more of a stretch the field type of tight end. Take the deep shot with him. He's gone. He's in Carolina now. These two guys are not really a threat at tight end. That's why I'm interested in whoever becomes this wide receiver 2 for the Arizona Cardinals, because they're going to get some passing volume. And this could be a reason why Chase Edmonds gets a little bit more value if he gets some more passing work, because that tight end position does no longer exist. So overall, stay away from these tight ends in fantasy for redraft and dynasty purposes. Maybe if you're really desperate and you want to try a stash guy for dynasty, you could look at Kerry Angeline. He was an undrafted free agent rookie out of North Carolina State. He's a really big guy, not really skillful at anything, but maybe he finds his way on the field. Maybe he turns into something down the long term, but not really a guy that I'm going out and targeting. But if you're really in a deep league with a lot of taxi squad spots, maybe you could throw him on the end of your taxi squad and turns into something. Last but not least, just talk about the offensive line real quick. The offensive line, at 3 out of the 5 are the same starters as last year with DJ Humphries, Justin Pugh, and Kelvin Beachum. So those are pretty good there. They moved on from J.R. Sweezy and Mason Cole and replaced them with Rodney Hudson, upgrade at the center position, and Brian Winters, which is arguably an upgrade at the guard position. Brian Winters is a little bit older now, so we kind of see him down on the downtick of his career. If he is not able to produce at a high level, we got Josh Jones, second-year player out of the University of Houston, a guy that I like quite a bit coming out of college, and Max Garcia, kind of a veteran for the Denver Broncos that could come in and fill in that spot if need be. So I think their offensive line's looking about as good as it's looked in, a pretty long time, honestly, because that was kind of the downfall for the Cardinals, especially, before Kyler Murray got there with Josh Rosen. That offensive line was terrible, and it's slowly improved over the years, and some of these guys have really stepped up, the guys that they drafted, the guys that they brought in via free agency, via trades, and I think it's going to be a good group this year. But overall, pretty solid offensive base for the Cardinals. I think they're a very interesting team because there could be some value here, whether it's the running back position, the wide receiver 2 on this team, and definitely some guys to watch out for. Not quite as big an impact in terms of sleepers for Dynasty, but a very, very interesting team for our 2021 redraft season. But with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed. As always, if you guys are new to my channel, please consider subscribing. Definitely would appreciate it. And this channel is really about you, the viewer, helping you guys with your fantasy football teams, helping you guys with your DFS, whether it's NBA or NFL. And then we're going to be talking some NFL draft prospects for 2022 season once everything kind of gets rolling with the fantasy football season as well. Definitely a lot of great content that's going to be coming out. If there's anything you guys would like to see in particular, please let me know. Obviously, I did take a little bit of a break there, but definitely coming back. I'm going to be doing this series where I go through each team day by day, talking about the impact of the fantasy players for the 21 season, as well as some potential dynasty stashes as well along the way. But with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed. And as always, I truly do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It definitely means a lot to me, and I hope each and every one of you has a great rest of your day.